Chav Zayin Omen Aleph. All we need is Amar Shmuel on Chavav Amid Beis. And Shmuel said that one chalitza would be sufficient for all. So you had 3 sisters and their husbands respectively died. They fell for Yibum in front of 2 brothers. So there were 3 brothers originally, now there are only 2 brothers. And Shmuel says one can give chalitza to all 3 sisters. And the Gemara says the following: Cholatz li achios. There's another statement of Shmuel, lo nifteru tsaros. So let's see if we can work out the case. We have Shimon and Levi are married to Rachel and Leah, 2 sisters. Shimon is married to Leah, and Levi is married to Rachel. Shimon has another wife in addition to Leah. Her name is Sarah. Levi has another wife in addition to Rachel. Her name is Rivka. Both Shimon and Levi pass on without any children, and the 2 sisters, Rachel and Leah, now fall for Yibum, together with their tsaros, to Ruvain, who is the 3rd brother of Shimon and Levi. Ruvain gives chalitza to Leah, the wife of Shimon, and lo nifteru tsaros. According to Shmuel, Sarah, who's the tzara of Shimon, the other wife of Shimon besides Leah, needs her own chalitza. Now, when chalitza was given to Rachel, who is the wife of Levi, Rivka, the tzara, the 2nd wife of Levi, needs her own chalitza. And what's the logic here of Shmuel, lo niftu tzaros, the tzaros need their own chalitza? Because we have a principle called achos zikukoso, that the sister of another sister who falls for you for Yibum, such a chalitza is a chalitza psula, because it doesn't have the option of implementing Yibum. Chalitza is given when there was an alternative of Yibum, but in this case, because of achos chalutzaso, there was no option of Yibum. Therefore, the chalitza is considered a chalitza psula. It's a secondary kind of chalitza. It's not the real deal. And therefore, Shmuel says that therefore the tsaros need their own chalitza, even though the chalitza that the tsaros are going to get is also a chalitza psula, because there's no yibum for the tzara as well, because by virtue of the isur of achos kukasa. But nevertheless, that isur is kal, it's kuflamid kal, it's relatively lightweight compared to the isur of achios, and therefore that chalitza is fine. And this is what's going to happen. So the chalitza, again, let's go over it. The chalitzas ha'achios eino poteres es hatzaros. But if he flipped it around the other way and he gave chalitza to the tsaros, that's considered 100% chalitza. And therefore, since the Isur is only an Isur Kal vis-a-vis the Tzaros, that Chalitza Poteres Es Ha'achios. So the Gemara asks the following question. According to Shmuel, that cholatz li achios lo nifteru tsaros, why is it that Shmuel, in the case of three achios that fell for Yibum in front of two achim, so we had a case where Reuven and Shimon, Reuven gave chalitza to all three achios, and according to Shmuel, the chalitza that was given to the second achos, who fell secondly, right? There was a sequence of three different ptiros, so three different chalitos. When we get to the second chalitza, it's already a chalitza psula. Now, the reason for that is because when he gave chalitza to the first one, the second one became asura ola b'yibu because of achos chalutzasa. So we have now a chalitza psula. So why is it that Shmuel says that Reuven can give a chalitza? Heicha dekaima chalitza de Shimon, chalitza kshera. There would have been a possibility of demanding that Shimon, who had not yet given chalitza, should give chalitza to one of the sisters. And that second chalitza would have been a chalitza kshera on the part of Shimon. Now you might ask, but even Shimon has the problem that the shnia is asura b'yibum because she was achos kukaso at the time of the nefila for a yibum. And we have a principle of nesra olav sha'achas nesra olamis. But nevertheless, it's a superior chalitza to that of Reuven, because Reuven's iser vis-a-vis the second achos is achos kukaso, whereas Shimon is not osir alea, but mitzad nesra. Okay, we have to understand what that means exactly. But in any event, why does Shmuel hold that Reuven, when he gives chalitza to the second achos, that's called a chalitza psula because he already gave chalitza to the Rishona, and she becomes achos chalutzaso, and therefore that's called a chalitza psula. And that chalitza psula of Reuven, poteres es Shimon michalitzasa kshera. That doesn't make any sense, because Shmuel, according to his shita, should have said that Shimon's chalitza would be superior as far as the shnia is concerned. So the Gemara answers, what does it mean, echad choletz lekulam? Right, in the case that we mentioned on Chavav Hamid Beis, where there were three sisters that were married and they fell for Yibum in front of two brothers, and yet Shmuel says, Echad choletz lekulam. Why is Echad choletz lekulam if Shmuel holds that in the case of chalitza psula, each one of the Yevamos needs her own independent chalitza? And after the first chalitza, you're talking about achos chalutzaso, which would mean that the chalitza afterwards of Reuven would be a chalitza psula. Why is it echad choletz lekulam? So the Gemara answers, my echad choletz lekulam, nami dikamar I am tza'is. So Shmuel is not talking about the first two achios. In those cases, surely the Rishon is choletz l'Rishona, and the Sheni is choletz l'Shniya. Because as we said before, the second chalitza of Shimon is Me'ula, is better than the chalitza of Reuven of the Rishon. So take for example, the case that we mentioned, there were five brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda and Yisachar. And we said that there were three sisters, Rachel, Leah, and Sarah. Leah married Rachel, I'm sorry, Levi married Rachel, Yehuda married Leah, Yisachar married Sarah, Levi dies without children, Yehuda dies without children, and finally Yisachar dies without children. And their wives, respectively, fall for Yibum in front of Reuven and Shimon for Yibum. So the din is that Reuven is Choletz Rachel, the wife of Levi. He was the one who died first. Shimon Choletz Leah, Ashes Yehuda. He was the one who died second. And that Chalitza is superior to the Chalitza of Reuven because Leah is Asura Ola Bishum Achos Chalutzasa, because he already gave Chalitza to Rachel, her sister. And Shmuel says that one is Choletz for all of them. What did he mean? I am Tzoyes. As far as Sarah, who's married to Yisachar, he was the one who died third in the sequence. So since Sarah is Asura LeRuven and to Shimon, both because of Achos Chalutzaso, because Reuven gave Chalitza to Rachel, her sister. Shimon gave Chalitza to Leah, who's the sister of Rachel. Is each one of those two Chalitzos are psulos. And that's where Shmuel holds that a Chalitza psula Eina tricha lachzar al kol ha'achim. And if teres b'chalitzas echad man. So wait a second. What are you telling me? It says here, echad choletz lekulon. How can you possibly tell me that Shmuel had in mind that one would be choletz lekulon only on the third sister? Well, lekulon kamar. Shmuel is clearly indicating that one chalitza is effective for all of them. And the first ach, which we called Reuven, his chalitza is for all the sisters, to pater them all up. So the Gemara answers, Keva deruba gabe kari le'lekulon. Since as far as these achios is concerned, 2 out of 3 of them, which is already a rove, had chalitza, and that means the choletz l'shlishis. So from the beginning, there was a chalitza for one of them, of the 2 first ones, and a chalitza ma'ula. Those 2 are chalitza ma'ula. And then at the end, we get to a chalitza shlishis, which is really a chalitza psula, and that's what he calls kulon. That means most of the 3 had what you call a chalitza ma'ula, first class chalitza. Ibai Sema, the Gemara offers another interpretation of Shmuel, of Shita Shmuel. Shmuel, who says that one is choletz for all of them, and he means that Reuven is choletz for all the sisters. Rachel fell for Yibum first, Leah fell for Yibum second, and Sarah third. And the chalitza of Reuven for Leah, the one who was second, is a chalitza psula because she's already achos chalutzasa. He already gave chalitza to Rachel, the first one. The chalitza of Shimon, on the other hand, is a chalitza ma'ula. He didn't give chalitza yet to any one of the sisters. Nevertheless, the chalitza of Reuven to Leah, which is, as we said before, a chalitza psula, that paters up Leah, even though there was a first-class chalitza that Shimon could have done. And excuse me, Kika Mashmua chalitza ma'alya be'ina. And there's no tour that's generated by chalitza psula. I mean lemiftar tzarasa. You cannot pater up the zika to the tzara unless there's a chalitza kshera. Aval miftara nafsha, but the Yevamot herself, if there was a chalitza, even if it was a chalitza psula, patra, it removes the zika from the other brothers, even though it's a chalitza psula. And even if one of the other brothers could have given a chalitza kshera, like for example, Leah patters up herself with the chalitza of Reuven, even though it's a chalitza psula, she's achos chalutzaso. And even though we have Shimon who could have done and implemented a chalitza kshera. Ufa Omar Shmuel. Second. Now, the background to this Amar Shmuel is that Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Rachel and Leah are sisters. Shimon marries Leah. Levi marries Rachel. Shimon has another wife besides Leah, and her name is Sarah. And Shimon has another wife besides Sarah. I'm sorry, Shimon has another wife besides Leah, Sarah, and Levi has another wife besides Rachel. Her name is Rivka. Okay, Shimon and Levi die without children. Their wives fall in front of Reuven for Yibum because there are only three brothers. Cholatzli Achios. So he gave chalitza to Leah and to Rachel. Lo nifturat Sarah. Sarah and Rivka will not become pturos with the chalitza of Reuven. They need their own chalitza. However, if Reuven was choletz Saros, he gave the chalitza to Sarah and Rivka, then niftu achios. Then the chalitza of the tsaros would be effective, and the achios themselves, which means Rachel and Leah, they could marry anyone in the shuk. So Shimon, let's say, has two wives. We called it, let's say, Sarah and Rivka. Okay, Shimon dies without children. His two wives fall for Yibum to Reuven. Reuven gives a get to Sarah and to Rivka. I'm sorry. Reuven gives a get to Sarah and not to Rivka. Then Cholatz, meaning Reuven gave chalitza to Sarah, balas a get, the one who received the get, is lo niftarat Sarah. Rivka, the tzara, needs her own chalitza in order to patter up the zika. And what's the logic here? Since Sarah, the balas get, had already experienced through the get a klishus hazika, it already weakened the zika, because he's not allowed to be miyabim or after he gave her a get, midrabanan. So therefore, the chalitza becomes a secondary chalitza, and it cannot generate a ptur with regard to the zika of Rivka Sarasa. That's a zika ma'ula. So a chalitza on a zika klusha is not effective on a zika ma'ula. Now, if he gives chalitza to the tzara, that's Rivka, she's the tzara of Sarah, who's the balas haget. Then nifteres balas haget b'chalitza shel Rivka. The chalitza that he gives to Rivka, which is a full-fledged chalitza, and it removes the zika, that will remove the zika as far as Sarah is concerned, who had received the get. Now we have a third case where two wives of Shimon fall for Yibum to Reuven, and Reuven does a maimar to Sarah, which is Kiddushin D'Rabbanan of Kesef or Shtar. And as a result of the maimar, Nifsalim Shar HaYevamos Milis Yamin. So that the maimar that he gave Reuven to Sarah is going to passel Yibum as far as the other wife is concerned. Now, after giving Maimar to Sarah, Ruvain cholatz lebalas haMaimar, he gives chalitza to Sarah. Lo niftera hatzara, Rivka, the tzara, needs her own chalitza. Why is that? So why is it the chalitza to Sarah, who's the balas haMaimar, is not effective as far as Rivka is concerned? And the answer is because the chalitza to Sarah, the balas haMaimar, does not remove the zika legamre. She needs a get because he gave her a maimar. So such a chalitza is, so to speak, an inferior chalitza, and it doesn't have the power to be effective to pater up the tzara. She needs her own chalitza to remove her zika. Now he gave chalitza l'tzara to Rivka the tzara of Sarah, balas haMaimar. And we said that that chalitza paters up not only Rivka, but niftera balas haMaimar. It's an effective chalitza even as far as Sarah is concerned. Well, again, Sarah still needs to get l'ma'amaro. So the Gemara tries to clarify Shmuel, who said that cholatz la'achios lo niftu tzaros, but l'tzaros niftu ha'achios. Maishna li'achios to lo niftu ha'tzaros, ta'havi lo achos isha bezika. Right, there are two sisters who are prohibited, each one of them, from yibum because of the isur of achos kukaso. Therefore, the chalitza is called the chalitza psula, and it cannot pater up the tzaros. And cholatz l'tzaros nami lo lifturi achos. Why don't we apply the same yardstick and be consistent as far as a chalitza to the tzaros? Davi l'tzaros achos isha bezika. Each one of the tzaros is a tzara to achos kukaso. And achos kukaso is like achos ishto. So there's a tzara of an erva. And that's why Yibum is blocked. If there's no possibility of Yibum, the chalitza psula, how can it pater up the achios? Why did Shmuel say chalitzas hatzaros, poteres as achios? And the Gemara answers, because Savra Shmuel ain't zika. The achios are not asuris l'syabim under achos kukaso, because Shmuel holds ain't zika. And therefore the tzaros are mutaris l'syabim, and the chalitza to the tzaros is the chalitza kshera, paters up the achios. The Gemara later on is going to ask that if you're holding ain't zika, the chalitza of the achios should be kshera. Why can't that chalitza of the achios pater up the tzaros? Why does it go only in one direction? But the Gemara now is asking, how is it possible to say that Shmuel accepts them on the Omer of Ein Zika? That cannot be consistently maintained. Amar Shmuel back on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, in the case of Shomeres Yavam, says that you're not allowed to marry her mother. If the Shomeres Yavam passes on, you're not allowed to marry her mother. Why? Because Yesh Zika. Which means that a Zika is Keishus, the Yevamot is like his wife, and he's not allowed to marry his wife's mother even after his wife dies. So now we have the following difficulty. How can the chalitza of the tzaros, according to Shmuel, operate effectively to pater up the achios if yesh zika? So in other words, the halacha that the chalitza of the tzaros paters up the achios is based on ein zika, but Shmuel himself goes on record as holding yesh zika. So the Gemara answers that when Shmuel made the statement of cholatz l'tzaros poteres es ha'achios, that's the divrei omer ein zika kama. He was only pointing out a theoretical According to that shita that ain't zika, I myself hold yesh zika. But according to that man, the Yomi maintains that ain't zika, then the chalitza to the tsaros is a perfectly healthy chalitza. There's no quasi erev of achos chalutzaso because ain't zika. So the Gemara says, if Shmuel is explaining the man Yomi who says ain't zika, then choletz liachos amaylo niftu atzaros. As we asked before, why is it only one directional? The problem with the achios is achos gukasa, but you're telling me now that ain't zika. So again, there are three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, two sisters, Rachel and Leah. Shimon is married to Leah, and he has another wife named Sarah. Levi is married to Rachel, he has another wife named Rivka. Shimon and Levi die, etc., and their wives fall for even in front of Reuven. Reuven gave chalitza first to Leah, and that's a chalitza kshera, because he could have been miyabim Leah. Leah's achos kukaso. The answer is we're holding ain't zika. If there's ain't zika, there's no iser of achos kukasa. And therefore that chalitza to Leah patters up Sarah. But now if Reuven subsequently gives chalitza to Rachel, the sister of Leah, that's a chalitza psula, because he cannot be miyabim her. And if he cannot be miyabim her, that makes it into a chalitza psula, and it cannot pater Rivka l'tzara. So Gemara says, wait a minute. Bishlema, I understand Rivka, who's the tzara of Rachel, lo tiftar. The chalitza of Rachel cannot pater up Rivka hatzara. Why? They came in the chalitzla when Reuven gave chalitza to Leah, who's the sister of Rachel, is for hadar chalitzla l'Rachel nesol of mishum nesol of Rachel yibu mishum isra achos chalutzas. Okay, so that's after the chalitza. There's an iser here of achos chalutzas. Forget about achos kukaso because well the ain't zika, but there's achos chalutzas. Is havila chalitza de Rachel? Now, if after giving chalitza to Rivki gave chalitza to Rachel, chalitza psula, because he could not possibly be miyabim Rachel, she's achos chalutzasa, and therefore would not pater up Rivka hatzara, and Rivka's chalitza would be a chalitza ma'ula. So that much I understand. If Rivka's status as a tzara, and therefore the chalitza of Rachel could not pater up Rivka. That's called achos chalutzas. Ella, but what about the case of Sarah? Who's the tzara of Leah? Tipata, why can't the chalitza of Leah be effective? Leah falls for Yibum. She's muteres for Yibum. There's no Isra achos kukas who are holding ein zika. And a chalitza cherek should pater up Sarah, hot Sarah. Why is it that the chalitza of Leah is not enough to pater up hot Sarah? Sarah. The Gemara answers, what does it mean? Cholatz liachios. Lo nifteru tsaros, nami dekamer Shmuel at tzara de Rachel on Rivka, the tzara of Rachel. What's the problem with Rivka, the tzara of Rachel? And why is it that the chalitza of Rachel cannot effectuate a ptur for Rivka hatzara? And the answer is that since Rachel's chalitza is a chalitza psula, there's no possibility of yibum, because he gave chalitza to Leah, her sister, and that's called achos chalutzaso. It cannot pater up Rivka hatzara. So the Gemara asks, but wait a second. Tsaros kama. Shmuel used a language of plural, of tsaros, not tsara, but tsaros, which implies that even Sarah, the tsara of Leah, would not be niftera b'chalitzas Leah. Why not? Why shouldn't the chalitz of Leah pater up Sarah, the tsara of Leah? And the Gemara answers that truthfully, Sarah, who's the tsaras of Leah, is poteres. She becomes free, a free agent with the chalitz of Leah. Only Rachel, the tsar of, Rivka, the tsar of Rachel, does not become ptura with chalitas Rachel. I use the word tsaros. Tsaros the alma. All the tsaros of achios shechalitzos and psula. That's what he's referring to. That's any kind of psul as a result of Isur Yibum, and that's generated by a chos chalutzoso. There's no ptur for the chalitz of the achios. Now that's how we read the word tsaros. Gemara asks, if that's what Shmuel has in mind, that cholatz liachios lo niftu tsaros means for Rivka the tsara of Rachel, then cholatz l'tsaros, when Shmuel says that if he gave chalitza to the tsaros, niftu achios, that chalitza to the tsaros is effective for the achios, then Shmuel has in mind that if he gave chalitza to Rivka, the tsara of Rachel, then Rachel is nifteres b'chalitzasa. So the Gemara asks, v'at tsaras Rachel mi fatra. If he gives chalitza to Rivka, the tsara of Rachel, does Rachel become ptura mi chalitza? After all, Rivka, the tsara of Rachel, is asura b'yimo. She's called krovas chalutzaso. But Tanana, we have a Mishnah later on in Daf Mem. Asur adam b'tsaras krovas chalutzaso. Let's say Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and Rachel and Leah are sisters. Shimon marries Rachel. Avram, who's not one of the brothers, he marries Leah, and he has another sister, another wife named Sarah. Shimon dies without children, and his wife Rachel who's the wife of Shimon, falls for Yibum to Reuven. Reuven gives her chalitza. Avram dies. The din is that Reuven cannot marry Sarah, who is the tzara to Leah, who is krovas Rachel chalutzaso. Since he gave chalitza to Rachel, Leah becomes krovas Rachel. Leah becomes a tzara to krovas Rachel. And even though Leah was married to Avram, who's not one of the brothers, not related to Reuven, the Chachamim made a gzera. They were afraid maybe the spectator would make a mistake and he's going to come to the mistaken conclusion that chalatz lachosa, if he marries Sarasa, they are going to make a statement that Tsaras Chalutza Muteres. And we know that Tsaras Chalutza is Asura. Here too, after he gives Chalitza to Leah, Rivka becomes Asura on Reuven. No possibility of Yibum. She is the Tsaras Rachel Krovas Chalutzasa. So once Rivka becomes Asura B'Yibum, therefore her Chalitza is a Chalitza Psula, and it cannot part the Rachel with Chalitza. So now we have a kash on Shmuel. Shmuel said Cholatz Litzaros, Nifteru Achios. He means that Rivka partners up Rachel b'Chalitzasa. And yet Rivka is Asura al Rachel B'Yibum. So the Chalitza is a Chalitza Psula. How could the Chalitza of Rivka pater up Rachel if it's a Chalitza Psula? The Gemara answers, no. You misinterpreted Shmuel. When Shmuel says that cholatz liachios nifteru tsaros, but tsaros lo nifteru liachios, in the same way that if he gives chalitza to the achios, and the din is that he cannot pater the tsaros from chalitza, he gives chalitza to the tsaros, nifteru achios chalitzos, and keep going. He gave chalitza to Rachel, after he gave chalitza to Leah, her sister. Because as far as Rachel is concerned, her chalitza is a chalitza psula, and it cannot pater up Rivka hatzara. But if he gave chalitza to Rivka, the tzara of Rachel, that would pater up Rachel. That's the way we understood Shmuel. He says that's impossible. We cannot interpret Shmuel in that way, because the Gemara had already raised the objection, the question, that the din that Rivka's chalitza is a chalitza psula cannot pater up Rachel. So even though Rivka, in this case, is the tzara of Rachel, how could Shmuel possibly maintain that the chalitza to Rivka paters up Rachel? That's a chalitza psula. But rather, Shmuel Nami, what he had in mind, Shmuel, is Hischil. If he begins with the chalitza of the achios, Velo Hischil, and he did not begin with the chalitza of the achios. So what does that mean? Hischil, Velo Hischil. Ka'omar, this is what Shmuel had in mind. He gave chalitza to the achios, and he gave chalitza to the tsaros. What does that mean? And here he says the chalitza of the achios lo niftu at tsaros. Is hischil biachios? First he gave chalitza to Leah. Lo yigmar betzaros. After the chalitza to Leah, he should not give chalitza to Rivka, because if he gives chalitza to Rivka, who's again the tzara of the other sister, that's Rachel, that's going to be a chalitza psula, and it cannot pater up Rachel. So this is what Shmuel means when he says lo niftu tsaros, that the chalitza of Rivka, who's the tzara of Rachel, does not pater up Rachel. And how much more so the chalitza of Rachel herself does not pater up her tzara Rivka. Because Rachel's asura oa, as we said earlier, that's called achos chalutzasa. Now, why is it that the chalitza of Rivka, who's the tzara of Rachel, cannot pater up Rachel? And the answer is because that's a chalitza psula. Why? Because there's no heter yibum in such a case. Disnan also liyodam mitzaras krovas chalutzasa. So when he first gave chalitza to Leah, he's not allowed to be miyabim Rivka because she is saras Rachel, krovas Leah chalutzasa. And also the other vitzaras krovas chalutzasa. Therefore, that chalitza to Rivka is a chalitza psula, and Shmuel therefore means that choletz litzaros nifteru achios kshehiskel b'tzaros. If the first chalitza he gave was to Sarah, who's the tzara of Leah, then yigmar af biachios. After he gives chalitza to Sarah, who's the tzara of Leah, he's allowed to give chalitza to Rachel, and her Sarah Rivka is nifteres b'chalitzasa. Why? Because chalitzas Rachel is a chalitza shera. And this is what Shmuel means when he says nifteru achios, because chalitzas Rachel poteres es Rivka tzarasa, and how much more so the chalitza of Rivka hatzara, meaning Rachel's tzara, poteres es Rachel. So it goes in both directions. So the chalitza of Rachel patters up Rivka, and the chalitza of Rivka patters up Rachel. Why is the chalitza of Rachel considered a chalitza kshera? The answer is because she's muteres b'yibum. She is a krovas Leah, who is tzarasa shel Sarah. That doesn't generate an is. Kidisnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, mutar adam b'krovas saras chalutzasam. So notice the difference between the two principles. In the first principle, we're talking about saras krovas chalutzas. In the second case, we're talking about krovas saras chalutzas, not saras krovas chalutzas. So Reuven gave chalitza to Sarah. Sarah is the wife of Shimon, and she has a tzara by the name of Leah, is mutar b'Rachel achosa. This is mutar adam b'krovas saras chalutzasa. There's no gzeras chachamim here. So here also in Shmuel is muteres lo Rachel b'yibum. Yibum is muteres. Rachel is muteres liyibum because she's a krova of Leah, who's the tzara of Sarah chalutzasa. Like one step far removed. Rav Ashi Omar Liolam Kidika Amrit. We're going to go back to the original interpretation of Shmuel, the simple interpretation, straightforward, that Cholatz li achios lo niftu tzaros, and in the same exact scenario, Cholatz li tzaros niftu achios. So why is it that Cholatz li achios lo niftu tzaros? Because Shmuel holds yesh zika, and the sisters are asuros b'yibum under the law of achos kukasa. Therefore, the chalitza is chalitza psula, and it doesn't pat up the tzaros. The chalitza, the tzaros patters up the chalitza for the achios. Mishum de lo alima zika l'shavuye l'tzara ke'erev, which literally translates the zika is not strong enough to generate a tzara like an erev. In other words, what it really means is that the Chacham did not make this gzera on tzaras achos zugukasa. They didn't upgrade the status, or downgrade, I guess you could say, the status of tzaras achos kukaso such that the chalitza would be a chalitza psula. That far they didn't go. And therefore, the chalitza of the tzaros will patter up the achos. Anya Kavasi de Rav Ashi, the Gemara quotes a brayso to support Rav Ashi. Olatz li achios lo nifteru tzaros. So from the fact that it says that the chalitza to the achios does not patter up the tzaros, we can derive by inference that ha litzaros nifteru achios. In my timer, why is it that the chalitza the tzaros patters up the achios? Lav mishum de kasav yesh zika. Because the reason why the achios are asuros b'yibum is because of the isur of achos kukaso, which is based and predicated on the principle of yesh zika, and therefore their chalitza is a chalitza psula that cannot patter up the achios. But for lo alima zika, the isur zika is not strong enough l'shvuye l'tzara to make the tzara into an erva, like an erva. Therefore, poteres hatzaros es achios. The chalitza to the tzaros patter up the achios. And a simple reading of this brayso sounds like Rav Ashi. So Gemara rejects it. Omar Abba Bar Mamel Hamani, this brayso that holds that the chalitza the tzaros patters up the achios. Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai never accepted the isur tzara. Isnan Beit Shammai Matirinus Atzoros Liachim. Go ahead and be miyamim the tzara. And therefore this brisa holds that the chalitza of the tzaros is a chalitza ksheira because they have mutaros can be evil. And they patu up biachis, but Hihochi says the Gemara is then why should we say that the tzara is muteres through chalitza? Yibume nami tisyamim. Let the tzara fall for yibum and patu up the achos through yibum. The brisa doesn't say that mutaros l'syamim. It means the Mishnah does not reflect a shita Beit Shammai. So the Gemara answers the brisa holds ki Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Well, this is back on Daf Yud Daled. The Omar bo nisakin lem litzaros shiu choltos v'lo misyavos. He wants to be yotze the shita Beit Shammai, but matir the tzara of an erva for yibum. At the same time, to be yotze the shita Beis Hillel that the tzara is asura b'yibum. And now the problem is these seem to be mutually exclusive because if we're going to do like Beit Shammai, the vlad is according to Beis Hillel mamzer, because the tzara has the same status as the erva herself. The child is a mamzer. If on the other hand we will implement halacha like Beis Hillel and allow the tzaras erva to marry someone from a shuk without getting chalitza, is then the vlad of that marriage, according to Beit Shammai, is pagu. So let's make a takana that a tzaras erva should be choletzes v'lo misyabemes. Now we can satisfy both shitas, Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. The tzaras can marry anyone because they got chalitza, even according to Beit Shammai. And on the other hand, we're not going to allow yibum, so there's no mamzerus, no violation of a chiv kares. So if we assume that this brisa reflects the shita of Yochanan and Nuri, therefore tzaros choltos v'lo misyavos. That's why there's no yibum for the tzaros. So the Gemara asks, "V'omar mar lo espiku ligmar sadovar shenitfus hasha." We never actually implemented the takana of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. He died, I guess, before they got a chance to accept the enactment and vote in favor of it. Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak acharav. In the generation after Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, chazru v'tiknu. They followed the legacy of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and they made that takana that the tzara should be choltos. Even though this brisa reflects the shita Beit Shammai, and therefore there could be yibum, but we're talking about the takana based on the logic of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and therefore the tzaras only have chalitza, but not yibum. And the next Gemara on Chav Zayin and Bezi Boilahu is the suffix of Balas Hagelu, Balas HaMaimar, Ezeman Kodemus. We're here on Daf Chav Zayin and Bezi Boilahu. And the Gemara raises the following suffix. Let's say Shimon dies and he leaves two wives, Sarah and Rivka. They fall for Yibum to Ruvain, his brother. Ruvain gives Maimar to Sarah, and to Rivka, Hatzara, he gives a get. And the Chacham made a takana that once he gives a get, it's like chalitza, and it passes her and the tzara for yibum. And the Gemara vacillates about Balas Haget, Rivka, who received the get to pater up the Zika, Ubalas HaMaimar, Sarah, on the other hand, received Maimar, and both of them are now Asuros Midrabanon Lisyabem, and therefore Chalitzas Shtehen Chalitza. Psul, Chalitza Psul. Eze mehen kodemes. Which chalitza is ma'ula yosef? That with that chalitza you can pater up the tzara. Is it the chalitza to Rivka, who's the balas haget? That's adifa. That's kodemes. That gets priority, and that's called ma'ula biyoser, and it's superior. It supersedes the chalitza of Sarah, the balas hamaymer. Why? Mishum di askel ba b'chalitza. He's already begun the process of breaking up the zika by giving her a get, and now the next natural step beyond the get to be mafkia, whatever little zika is left after the get, is chalitza. So that's a chalitza that's mafkia the zika. So since the chalitza after the get would pater her completely, and now she get married l'shuk, that chalitza is adifa on the chalitza's balas hamaymer. That's not going to pater her for shuk. She still needs a get. Oh, Dilma, on the other hand, maybe chalitza Sarah, the balas hamaymer adifa, and that should have kedima. That's called ma'ula yoser me chalitzas Rivka balas haget mishum de krova libia, because since the maimar strengthens the zika and enhances the ishus relationship between the yavam and the yavama, therefore the chalitza is called a chalitza ma'ula. It patches up the entire zika. Not like the case of the balas haget, where the zika relationship has already been broken to some extent and diminished. Omar Avashi Toshma, let's try to be machriya in this suffix based on a brisa later on in Daf Nun Aleph. Modeh u'modeh Rab Gamliel. Rab Gamliel holds that there's no such thing as a get liachar get, meaning if Shimon has two wives, Sarah and Rivka, and he dies without children, his two wives fall in front of Ruvain, his brother for Yibum, and Ruvain gives a get to Sarah, he passes her and the Sarah min Yibum, and therefore Nesru Olav Krovos Sarah. The get is like a chalitza. And just like a chalitza, you're also on the krovos of the chalitza, so too in the case of get. So when he gave a get to Sarah. Now, if he gives a get to Rivka, Rav Gamliel holds that get to Rivka is not a get at all. It's not valid, and it doesn't even get off the ground. It doesn't register. And therefore, Ruvain is not possible likrovosera shel Rivka, because once he gave a get to Sarah, that's considered like a chalitza, and just like there's no chalitza after chalitza, and if he does chalitza to two different yevamos, the second chalitza is meaningless. It doesn't register at all. The same thing in get liachar get, because get is patterned after chalitza. So the get to Rivka is meaningless once he gave a get to Sarah. Same thing will apply, by the way, to Maimar, Achar Maimar. If Ruvain does a Maimar in Sarah, and that asers the Krovoseh Olav, he cannot marry any of her relatives, she needs a get, and the Maimar passes Rivka, the Tzara, from Yibum. Now he goes ahead and he does a second Maimar on Rivka. Rav Gamliel's shita is Ein Maimar Achar Maimar. The second Maimar to Rivka is not Kona at all. And she doesn't need Rivka a get for the Maimar. She's mutter b'krovoseh, because the Maimar of Sarah is considered mirabanan like Yibum, and Ein Yibum liachar Yibum. However, Gamliel's modeh sheyesh get liachar Maimar u'Maimar liachar get. So if, let's say, Reuben gives Sarah a get after he gives Rivka a get after he gave Maimar to Sarah. That get that he gives to Rivka is considered a get. It generates an isur to Krovoseh, and it's also generating an isur to Sarah, to whom he gave Maimar from the get-go. Or, for example, Modeh Rav Gamliel Maimar Achar get, if Ruvain gives Maimar to Rivka after the get that he gave to Sarah initially, that Maimar generates a chiv get, a tzrichus of a get for Rivka. She needs a get for that Maimar. And it generates an isur on Krovoseh. So Rav Ashi now is going to clarify his raya. E get adif. If the get that he gave to Sarah from the get-go is odd if it's better than the Maimar that he gives to Rivka afterwards, because the koach of the get to be mafkia, the zika, is like that of chalitza. So that's called get adif. The get that he gave to Sarah from the get-go is superior to the Maimar that he gives to Rivka afterwards. The get is more powerful to be mafkia the zika. It's like chalitza. Is lola heni Maimar. The Maimar that he gives subsequently to Rivka should not be valid to require a get for that Maimar and to generate an Isur of Ruvain on Hakrovos, Abasre, after the get that he initially gave to Sarah, because that get is considered like Chalitza, and there's no Yibum after Chalitza, and there's no Maimar, which is the beginning of Yibum, to be effective to make a kinyan after the get that he gave to Sarah, the initial get. The E Maimar Adif. And if you're going to tell me that the Maimar that he did with Sarah is Adif Miget, because Maimar is considered like Yibum, and it jacks up the Zika by a couple of decimals, is Lola Hani Get Abasre, the get that he gives to Rivka, should not be meaningful and effective to generate an Isar on Hakrovos, and to barrier or block the possibility of Yibum or Sarah Abasre after the Maimar that he gave to Sarah, because Maimar is like Yibum, and there's no Chalitz after Yibum, and so too there's no get after Yibum, because get is like a substitute for Chalitza. Elolav Shmamina, from the fact that get is meaningful after Maimar, and Maimar is meaningful after get, we see that get u'maimar ki adodininu. Both are on the same level; they're equal. So whether or not it's get, which is kachalitza, or maimar, which is like yibum, both cases the koach is shav. It's an equal koach as far as the Yevamot is concerned, and therefore there's an efficacy to get and maimar one after the other. Shma mina. So we see from this that as far as chalitza is concerned, both of them are equal, and one chalitza is not superior to the other chalitza. And both of them poslos, psulos, called poslos, called achas man, poteres chaverta, v'yachlots lieza sheyirtze. Omar Avun Omar Rab, shtei achios Yevamot shenoflu fnei Yavam echad. If Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi are brothers, Rachel and Leah are sisters. Ruvain married Rachel, Shimon married Leah. Ruvain dies without children, and then Shimon dies without children. And their wives fall for Yibum to Levi, and they are asuras on Levi b'Yibum because they're both zkukoso, so that's called achos zikukoso. Cholatz l'rishona, if Levi first gives chalitza to the wife of Ruvain who fell for Yibum first, is hutra, she's allowed li nasei l'shuk. It's a perfectly excellent chalitza. She get married. Cholatz, if Levi gave chalitza instead of to Rachel, to Sarah, who's the wife of Shimon, shenafla shniya, she fell for Yibum secondly, hutra, she's allowed to get married, and that chalitza is valid for Sarah. But Mesa Rishona, if Rachel, who fell for Yibum Rishona, and she dies before she received chalitza from Levi, is mutar b'shniya. Levi is allowed to be miyabim Leah. Levi could be miyabim Leah who fell shniya. And even though Leah was asura olav, because b'shas nefil yibum, immediately Leah became asura as achos kukaso, and she wasn't ru'uya liyibum even for sha'achas, because Rachel, her sister, was alive, and there was a zikas yibum to Rachel. Is Rav holds that in the Isser Zika, we don't say kevad shenesol of sha'achas tiyosol of olavis. And the Gemara is going to explain that. The Ein Tzarech Lomer goes without saying that after the Misa of Leah, who fell Shnia, that Shemuta Levi is allowed to be Miyabim Rachel Shenofla Rishona. Mishum Dahavi Yevama Shehutra V'Nesra V'Chazra V'Hutra Tachzar Lehetera Harishon. If the Yevama at the initial moment of Nefila Yibum had a Heter Yibum, because at that point, Adayin Lo Nofla Leah Chosel Yibum. We're talking after the death of the first brother who was married to Rachel, and Leah is not in the parish of Yibum. Then later on, Nesra, after Shimon dies, and Leah, the sister of Rachel, Nizkika Yibum, is now Rachel, who fell first for Yibum, now Shuv Nesra, because she's now Achos Kukaso, but Chazra V'Hutra, with the death of Leah, Rachel goes back to her original state of Heter Yibum. That's called Tachso Letera Rishon. So therefore, if Leah fell for Yibum, and she was Asura Yibum, she can then become Muteres afterwards, subsequently. In this kind of situation where Rachel fell for Yibum and she was Muteres, and only afterwards she became Asura, Choseres Letera Rishon. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan seems to agree with Rav to some extent, but then he disagrees with Rav, and he makes the following distinction. Mesa, if Leah fell second for Yibum, and Leah dies, then Muta Levi the Yavam is Muta Berachel Rishona, who fell first. And Rabbi Yochanan agrees, therefore, to Rav, that since Rachel at the time of Hanafila was Muteris L'Syabim, and only afterwards, when Leah fell for Yibum, she became Asura. I'm talking about Rachel. Therefore, now with the death of Rachel, which is Mafkia, the Erev of Achos Ishto, therefore, Choseres Leah Le'atera Rishon. Avol Mesa Rishona, if Rachel, who had the first Nefila, dies, Asur Levi cannot be Miyabim Leah, who fell second. Why not? My timer. Why is Leah Surolav? Why can he not be Miyabim Leah? And the Gemara answers the principle of Kol Yevamot Sheina Nikor B'Chas Nefil Yevam Yavaleh Keishes Ach Sheish Labanim. If at the time of the Nefila for Yibum there was an Iser Yibum, then at the moment of Nefila, when she's not Skuka Lisyabim, now we regenerate the Iser of Eishes Ach. And Asura Lisyabim Zu Shenesra Liyavam B'Shas Nefila. If she's Asura B'Shas Nefila, Yibum is out of the question. Even if afterwards Chazra Lios for Uya Yibum. But the critical moment is Shas Nefila. And so too, the din of Leah, who fell Shnia, since immediately B'Shas Nefila she was Asura L'Syabim, because she was Achos Kukaso, is therefore, even if that Iser is removed when Rachel dies, her sister, her din is that she's Asur Isura Olamis. And the Gemara asks, and Rav, who holds that Misa Rishona, that if she died first, Muta B'Shnia Lesle Haisvara, he doesn't accept, he rejects Rabbi Yochanan Svara of Kevan Shehutra Asura Ola, Kevan Shehoisa Asura Ola B'Shas Nefila Shuven Leheter Olamis. Vama Rav himself on Daf Lamed says if you have three brothers and two of them are married to two sisters. For example, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi are brothers. Rachel and Leah are sisters. Reuven marries Rachel. Shimon marries Leah. Reuven dies without children, and his wife falls for Yibum. The din is, he asur l'syavim l'Shimon. She's achos Leah ishto. If Leah subsequently dies, then the din is that Rachel's asur l'syavim l'Shimon olamis, even though the Sibas HaIsur was the Achos Ishto, and that was removed. Kol Isha she'ena nikori ba b'chas nafil Yevamot yavoleh harei ke'eshes ach sheyesh lo banim v'asura. So how can it be that Rav holds that Leah is muteres, Leah who fell secondly, after the death of Rachel, she's muteres. She was asura b'shas nefila. Our answer is Hani Milu. When does Rav say that Nesra Olav Shalachas, Nesra Olav Lamis, that's Heicha, Dik, Koi, Biapa? At the time of the Nefila, what's in front of her? Isra Achos Isha Do Raisa. Like Reuven V'Shimon V'Levi Achim, Rachel V'Leah Achios, Nasa Reuven is Rachel V'Shimon Nasa is Leah, Meis Reuven V'Lo Banav V'Nafla Rachel L'Ichto L'Yibam, is asur l'syavim l'Shimon because she's achos Leah ishto. And even if afterwards Leah dies, right, the wife of Shimon, adayin asur l'Rachel l'syavim l'Shimon. Mishum shenesra olav sha'achas isur olamas hamal hacham. But here, since Leah, at the time of the Nefila, nescha rak mishum achos kukaso, it's not achos isha doraisa, but rather achos kukaso d'rabbanon. Rav holds we can be matir for Yibum when chazro le'tera, because even if you hold like Zika d'Rabbanan, v'lo goz Rabbanan bisu Zika shetei asura olamis kishenesra b'shas nefil. Okay, then, so this is where we're going to stop. Again, we didn't get a chance to finish the Amud. We're up to Esvei Rabbi Yossi, which is approximately 12 lines up before the end of the Amud. Thank you very much.